It is an ugly film. You feel unclean whilst watching it. Even more so than with The Triumph of the Will, which is a superficial disguise of prejudice and aggressive supremacy, The Birth of a Nation displays a vision of resentment and bitterness at a supposed American betrayal. Griffith's empirically delusional understanding of the American Civil War, informed by the stories of his father and his friends during his youth, is profoundly misguided. His attitude toward African Americans is inarguably hateful. Whether we want to praise the film or not, censor it or not, we cannot deny that what exists on the screen is intense hatred for another ethnic group. Any defences of Griffith himself, offered by those who knew him and other contemporaries in the press discourse upon its 1915 release, are quite futile. I'll defend Griffith the artist. His creative ingenuity is at least as obvious as his hatred and bigotry, which is to say extremely overt and unavoidable. Here's what we also forget. To an American, a Yankee, in 1915, promoting the cause of the Confederacy is treasonous, disgraceful, un-American. 1915 America, for better or worse, was disgusted at a film which championed the seditious Confederacy, which had started a war that had enveloped the lives of an entire generation of American men, more so than at the film's depiction of African Americans or apparent apologetics for slavery. Now, of course, more urgently, it is the film's racial prejudice which upsets contemporary audiences, as these two political positions are seen as aligned anyway, support for the Confederacy and white supremacist attitudes. It might be seen as impossible to recognize impressive, impressionable, innovative art when it reflects such vile pathos. Sometimes innovation and scientific genius will disturbingly align. The motivation is evil, fueling a desire to learn, to create, to engineer change. The atom bomb was a remarkable accomplishment of human ingenuity and discovery. The atom bomb's existence is a damning indictment of our species' prospective elevation above other animals. Two things can be true at once. Imagine a more hateful film than The Triumph of the Will. Imagine a film which illustrated Hitler's distorted vision of a victimized noble German role in the First World War. That's The Birth of a Nation. It is a magnificent film if one wants to feel absorbed in an epic experience totally sympathetic to Griffith. If one wanted to let a hateful old man passionately tell you the story of his life, warts and all, and couldn't help but feel sympathetic for his pathetic closed-mindedness, and thus were compelled by his invigorating, enthused, exciting story, that's what The Birth of a Nation felt like. It is not comfortable to listen to stories I would imagine about an American veteran who had participated in the Indian Wars, or the frontier wars in my country, but you listen to their stories of survival and can somewhat appreciate their subjective story of fight or flight on the battlefield. If one was listening to a Vietnam veteran, or Iraq War veteran, Afghanistan even, discussing their experiences taking out the enemy, Charlie he is known as sometimes, and they were enjoying the feeling of victorious strife, would one scold them for enjoying that feeling of invading a country, or accept their subjective role as a pawn in a wicked, unlawful war, as they all are? That's up to the individual. I would pity them, but understand that they were shaped by their circumstances, as I am in feeling rather uncomfortable with the glorification of violent wars. In this country, Australia, the anti-war sentiment is very strong. Even our participation in recent Middle East conflicts was downplayed, de-emphasized by the government and media, knowing that people wouldn't gobble it all up as glorious patriotic expeditions. Anzac and Remembrance Day are about never letting any war happen ever again anywhere. So when an older person, plucked from their society and formatively moulded by a series of battlefields and traumatic violent engagements, decides to narrativize their experiences in that war, we accept it as before our time, really. Griffith took this too seriously. It transformed into a vile hatred, bigoted disdain for what he designated an other, his parents' and grandparents' feelings toward the Civil War epoch. To glorify war is one thing. To glorify wicked, aggressive supremacy, that is even more troublesome, more difficult to forgive in person. Griffith's film, The Birth of a Nation, totally laid the groundwork for the feature film as we know it today, inspired by 1914's Cabiria to be sure, though even with Cabiria, cinema as we know it would be profoundly different without the innovations embarked upon with The Birth of a Nation, taken to more interesting places by some of Griffith's peers, and Griffith himself, we could argue with some features later on, including Intolerance, obviously, the superior film by anyone's standards, I'm sure. And, those who were studying under Griffith, especially, their films wound up being magnificent. And then that's everyone who was an innovator in the silent era, from Alan Dwan to John Ford to King Vidor. Well, in America anyway. Comparing the Lincoln assassination scene in this film with John Ford's in The Prisoner of Shark Island from 1936 is a very telling indicator of how film language had developed in 21 years. We don't have to forgive, certainly not condone, the beliefs displayed in The Birth of a Nation, but we can accept them. A primitive man expressing disdain for another group in an elaborate, logistically ambitious and artistically inspired, unnervingly captivating filmic epic. Griffith was a cranky Neanderthal and a very gifted practitioner of his chosen art. In one world he was painting caves, in another arranging colours on canvas. In the 20th century, him and Billy Bitzer, perhaps the truer genius of the two really, utilised celluloid to transform 20th century art into the most exciting thus far in the species' permutating unpredictable history. Until the 21st century arrived, it's been quite interesting in film at least, even if music and the visual arts have been suffering otherwise to a degree. Thanks again, friends. I had to grapple with the original sin of the medium, because unless we understand why this film works, we cannot understand what evil people are capable of, and how we can, conversely, utilise this especially moving and riveting medium for an ethical good, rather. Thanks, everyone. Forgive any insensitivity in not just condemning this film and Griffith's existence, but I relate more with the hypothetical benign alien observers above us, witnessing our species' follies as indifferent, though cautiously concerned, unbiased witnesses. If we want to wag our index fingers at those aliens for not being smug, conformist, or self-righteous, for not trying to be or appear virtuous in order to impress others enough, then so be it. But they're obviously smarter than us to be able to observe us without knowing it, and arrive at Earth from light years away, so... Acting detached, not with self-protective amorality, but with sharper observation, when considering a contentious human event, as though it were a battle or conflict between primates, can allow us to see these things more clearly. It isn't a matter of some scary, spiritual, pervasively corrupting evil force, the manifestation of a supremacist tract in the recorded histories, but fearful, ill, and scattered thinking from rather delusional, quasi-superstitious, angry people. With education, the addressing of terrors, the allocating of supplies and resources to any in a need of them, and dialogue between others on very honest terms, we needn't have any more bigotry in our species' history, I could imagine. Don't let anyone push you around and stand up for yourself, but keep to yourself. Only push back in defense. Stay right by yourself without attempting to harm anyone else. Don't try to crush, try to convince. And if you cannot convince, they are possibly ill and can instead be pitied. Beware the bullies, but it isn't hard to be better than the bullies. It is certainly easier to be happier than them. They are inherently unhappy and in suffering. If we could all be well and honest and not strive for power or status or sadistic pleasures, and most of us might be sadistically inclined, which saddens me on a daily basis, we might turn out all right. Maybe. Film learnt at least. Perhaps we could. Have a good day, everyone. Stay well. Wishing you eternal happiness.